Welcome to a journey beneath the surface of personality into the hidden, often forgotten realm of the true self. Today, we do not gather to improve our image, perfect our habits, or strengthen our ego. We are here for something far more essential, to remember who we are beneath the noise, to trace the path not forward into ambition, but inward into authenticity. Carl Jung did not offer us steps to success, he offered us a mirror that does not flatter but reveals, a mirror that reflects not just the persona we present to the world, but the deeper self, the timeless presence buried beneath conditioning, trauma and social masks. Unlocking your true self, according to Jung, is not about adding more, it is about integrating what you've rejected, reclaiming what you've buried, and reconciling with the parts of you were taught to fear. It is about individuation, the sacred process of becoming whole, of becoming who you were before the world told you who to be. In this lecture, we will explore Jung's method not as theory, but as transformation. The shadow, the archetypes, the unconscious, these are not abstract terms, they are doorways, and through them, if you dare to walk, you will meet not the self you pretend to be, but the self you were always meant to become. The path to your true self begins with confronting your shadow, not escaping it. This principle sits at the very core of Carl Jung's psychological philosophy and spiritual insight. The modern world often tells us that to discover who we are we must look upward to affirmations, to goals, to light. But Jung invites us to go downward first, into the depths of the psyche where the unacknowledged, the unwanted, and the repressed lie dormant. To know the self in any authentic way, one must first encounter what they have tried not to know. The shadow is not the enemy of the self, it is the buried self. It is made of every part of you that you have exiled to maintain acceptance, security, or control. The feelings you were told were wrong, the thoughts you labeled dangerous, the traits that were unacceptable to your culture, family, or religion, all of it makes up the shadow. And until it is faced, it rules you in secret. Jung did not romanticize the shadow, nor did he demonize it. He understood it as inevitable and necessary. The shadow is not simply our bad side, as some might assume. It is our disowned side. It includes rage, yes, but also suppressed joy. It holds envy and greed, but also creativity, sexuality, assertiveness, and power. The shadow contains all the emotional experiences we weren't equipped to feel or express, so we lock them away. Yet, locking them away doesn't erase them, it only pushes them into the unconscious, where they begin to shape our behavior in indirect, often destructive ways. What you refuse to see in yourself will appear in your projections. What you avoid internally will become the source of your conflict externally. To walk the path toward your true self, then, is to reclaim what was lost. This is not a linear journey, nor a comfortable one. It requires radical honesty, the willingness to sit with what makes you uncomfortable about yourself, without flinching, denying, or blaming. Most people don't reach this point because they confuse self-discovery with self-polishing. They believe that growth means becoming more pleasant, more acceptable, more aligned with a perfect image. But Jung's approach says otherwise. True growth begins when you stop running from what you fear inside yourself and begin to understand it. The fear, the jealousy, the need for control, the shame, they all point to wounds that need healing and parts that need integration. The process of confronting the shadow often begins with being triggered. We find ourselves reacting strongly to something or someone. Maybe it's someone's arrogance, or their emotional neediness, or their tendency to dominate a room. When our response is disproportionate to the situation, this is often a sign that the shadow has been activated. Rather than dismiss or moralize the emotion, Jung would tell us to turn inward and ask, what part of me is being mirrored? What have I disowned in myself that I now see in the other? The answer isn't always immediate, but the question is a key. It unlocks a level of self-awareness that gradually softens the ego's resistance. There is often fear when people first approach their shadow. They believe that if they acknowledge these parts, they will become them. That if they look at their capacity for cruelty, it will grow. But this fear stems from misunderstanding. The reality is that unacknowledged shadow material has more control over you than what is consciously integrated. When you name it, feel it, and understand its origin, you don't become it, you transcend its unconscious hold on your life. The man who acknowledges his aggression can channel it constructively. With awareness, the woman who acknowledges her envy can understand her unmet desires and take empowered steps toward fulfillment. Integration gives you choice. Denial takes it away. The act of confronting the shadow also cultivates deep empathy. When you understand that you too carry darkness, You stop judging others for theirs. You stop needing to appear perfect and begin to allow yourself and others to be whole. This wholeness brings freedom. It allows you to experience life from a place of truth, not performance. It opens your relationships to genuine connection rather than manipulation or fear-based control. You are no longer ruled by the image you must maintain, because you are rooted in a deeper self that can hold contradiction without collapse. Jung believed that, without shadow work, we become fragmented. We split ourselves between what is allowed and what is hidden. We begin to live as partial beings, constantly fighting internal battles between our desires and our ideals. This inner division manifests in depression, anxiety, addiction, and conflict. The self can't breathe when it is constantly being divided. But when we confront the shadow, we begin to repair that division. We begin to stitch together the psyche, restoring the unity that allows for individuation. Individuation is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming whole, and wholeness requires that we stop rejecting what belongs to us. One of the paradoxes of shadow work is that it leads not only to humility but also to empowerment. As you reclaim parts of yourself, you regain energy that was lost in repression. You begin to notice that your voice grows stronger, your boundaries clearer, your instincts sharper. This is not ego inflation, it is the natural unfolding of authenticity. You are no longer drained by pretending. You no longer live in fear of being found out. You are congruent, integrated, aligned, and this alignment gives rise to the true self not as a fantasy, but as a lived reality. The true self is not a sanitized version of you. It is not free from struggle, but it is honest about the struggle. It is not defined by outer success, but by inner coherence. It is not desperate to be seen, but deeply grounded in being. The path to this self is through the very places you were told to avoid: the anger, the grief, the disappointment, the hunger for power, the deep longing to be loved. These places are not obstacles, they are gateways, and when you walk through them with awareness, courage, and compassion, you begin to unlock the doors to your own soul. The culture we live in often promotes avoidance. It tells us to be positive, to think happy thoughts, to manifest light, but light without shadow is illusion. The sun casts shadows because it exists, and so does the soul. If you want to live in your light, you must befriend your darkness. You must sit with the part of you that sabotages intimacy, that avoids responsibility, that craves validation, that fears rejection. These are not signs of failure, they are invitations to healing. The more you bring these parts into consciousness, the more freedom you find. You begin to respond rather than react. You begin to choose rather than compulsively repeat. You begin to love not because you need others to complete you, but because you have accepted yourself. The shadow loses its power the moment it is seen without judgment. That is the turning point. That is when the unconscious becomes conscious, and you are no longer driven by what you don't understand. Jung's method is not a technique, it is a path that begins with the willingness to face what you've buried. It is not quick, it is not easy, and it is not linear, but it is real, and it is through this very real confrontation with the shadow that you begin to meet your true self. Not the self that pleases others, not the self that wins approval, but the self that has always been there waiting in the dark to be remembered. Individuation is not self-improvement, it is self-recovery through inner integration. At the core of Carl Jung's depth psychology lies this radical departure from conventional ideas of progress. In a world obsessed with optimization, success, and self-enhancement, we are often taught that to become our best selves, we must strive, compete, and polish. But Jung challenges this notion entirely. For him, the journey of the soul is not about acquiring more, but about remembering and reclaiming what we have lost, what we have denied, and what we have buried. Individuation is not the act of becoming better in the eyes of the world, it is the sacred work of becoming whole in the eyes of the self. The word individuation refers to the process by which a person becomes an individual, a unified, an integrated being whose internal contradictions have been brought into awareness and reconciliation. This does not mean the elimination of struggle or the triumph of light over darkness. Rather, it means that the various parts of the psychonscious and unconscious, shadow and persona, masculine and feminine, instinctual and spiritual, begin to move toward a meaningful dialogue. They are no longer at war, but in relationship, and from that relationship emerges the self, not the ego, not the mask, but the deep center of the psyche that holds the full truth of who we are. Individuation, then, requires a turning inward. It asks us to step off the treadmill of achievement and approval and ask harder questions. Who am I when no one is watching? What parts of me have I exiled in order to be accepted? Where in my life am I performing rather than living? The answers to these questions are not always comfortable. They disrupt the narratives we have told ourselves. They call into question the very foundation of the self-image we have built. But this discomfort is sacred. It is the doorway to authenticity. The modern concept of self-improvement often operates within the structure of the ego. It assumes that there is a better version of us out there, happier, healthier, more attractive, more productive, and that our task is to chase it. This pursuit often leads us further from ourselves, not closer. We begin to confuse discipline with suppression, goals with identity, and success with fulfillment. We measure ourselves against ideals that are not rooted in our own nature, but in societal conditioning. Jung invites us to abandon this model and replace it with something deeper, and not a better self, but a fuller self. Not a shinier mask, but an unveiled soul. In this process, the shadow plays a central role. The parts of ourselves we have deemed unacceptably, our jealousy, our rage, our vulnerability, our pride, are not obstacles to overcome but pieces of the puzzle that must be integrated. Individuation means learning to sit with these parts, to understand where they come from, and to allow them a seat at the table of the self. It is not a sentimental process. It is gritty, raw, and often painful, but it is real. And in that reality, there is healing. Dreams are one of the tools Jung identified as keys to individuation. In dreams, the unconscious speaks in symbols and images. It brings forth messages from the forgotten parts of ourselves. By paying attention to our dreams, not interpreting them through rigid logic, but listening to them with reverence, begin to understand the language of the soul. A recurring figure in a dream may represent an emotion we have repressed. An animal may symbolize instinctual energy we need to reclaim. These images are not random, they are sacred guides. They help us recover what we have lost. Another essential aspect of individuation is the confrontation with archetypes. Archetypes are universal patterns of the human psyche, such as the hero, the mother, the trickster, the sage. They live within us and shape our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Often we are unconsciously possessed by these archetypes. We play out roles without knowing why. But through individuation, we begin to recognize these patterns and consciously engage with them. We understand when the hero in us is striving for achievement to avoid feeling worthless. We see when the inner child is crying out for care through passive-aggressive behavior. We become witnesses to our own inner theater, and, in that witnessing, we gain freedom. Importantly, individuation does not mean the dissolution of the ego. The ego is necessary for navigating the world. But individuation requires that the ego learn its place. It is no longer the ruler of the psyche, but a servant of the self. The ego learns to collaborate with the unconscious. Rather than deny or suppress it, it becomes humble, receptive, curious. This shift is profound. The personality that emerges from this process is not rigid or controlled, but fluid, responsive, and alive. This journey also involves facing inner polarity, the masculine and feminine energies that exist in every psyche. In Jungian terms, the animus represents the masculine energy in the female psyche, and the anima represents the feminine energy in the male psyche. These archetypes are often projected onto others. Men search for their anima in women, and women search for their animus in men. Individuation invites us to withdraw these projections and integrate these energies within ourselves. The man learns to listen to his intuition, to soften without losing strength. The woman learns to assert, to reason, to claim her voice without losing compassion. This integration leads to a richer, more balanced inner life. Individuation also challenges us to confront death, not just physical death, but the death of identity, of illusions, of attachments that no longer serve. This symbolic death is terrifying to the ego. It fears irrelevance, obscurity, and annihilation. But for the self to emerge, something must be let go. The persona we have clung to, the role, the label, the facade must fall away. This is not the end, but the beginning. In letting go of who we thought we were, we make space for who we truly are. The individuation process also reveals how deeply interconnected we are. As we become more whole, we become more compassionate. We stop projecting our shadow onto others and take responsibility for our inner life. We become less reactive and more present. We no longer need to control others to feel safe. We recognize the humanity in those we once judged. This shift in perception transforms relationships. We relate not from need or fear, but from presence and authenticity. We see others not as threats or tools, but as mirrors and fellow travelers. Individuation is a lifelong journey. There is no final arrival. The psyche is vast, mysterious, and always unfolding. The goal is not perfection, but presence, not certainty, but awareness. Each step inward opens new questions. Each integration invites a new layer. It is a spiral, not a straight line. But with each turn we come closer to the center, not the center society has given us, but the center of our being, the self. This path cannot be walked in haste. It requires solitude, silence, reflection, and patience. It often brings us into the wilderness of the soul where the familiar breaks down, and the unknown beckons. But it is in this wilderness that we find the treasure we have been looking for, often in the places we least wanted to go. The gift of individuation is not that we become something other than we are, but that we return to what we are with open eyes, open heart, and open hands. In the end, the question is not, how can I improve myself? The real question is, what have I forgotten about myself? What is waiting to be reclaimed, reintegrated, reloved? The answer to this question does not lie in books or in mirrors, but in the still, quiet voice beneath the noise. And when we begin to listen to that voice, when we begin to trust its wisdom, we enter the sacred terrain of the true self, not through achievement, but through remembrance, not through striving, but through surrender, not by becoming better, but by becoming whole. Your unconscious holds the keys to your authenticity. Listen to your dreams and instincts. Carl Jung emphasized that the unconscious is not merely a storage of forgotten memories or repressed desires, but a rich and intelligent layer of the psyche that contains the blueprint of who you truly are. To access the true self, you must learn the language of the unconscious, which speaks not in linear words or rational explanations, but in symbols, images, emotions, and intuitive impulses. This is where the soul speaks most clearly beneath the surface of waking logic. In the quiet realm of dreams and the gut sense that bypasses thought, the modern mind, shaped by centuries of rationalism and intellectual dominance, often dismisses the unconscious as irrational or chaotic. Yet Jung taught that what appears irrational on the surface may be the very voice of deeper wisdom. The unconscious is not chaotic, it is simply not linear. It reveals its truth, not through analysis, but through revelation. To truly unlock the path to authenticity, one must move beyond the noise of the conscious ego and begin to pay attention to what rises unbidden in the night, what stirs in the body, what whispers in moments of stillness. The unconscious is the reservoir of the self. It holds the raw, unfiltered essence of what we are before we were taught to conform, perform, or pretend. Dreams are one of the most powerful tools through which the unconscious communicates. Dreams, the conscious mind relaxes, the persona falls away, and the soul speaks. Dreams present the truth in symbols. They may not always make sense to the logical mind, but they always hold meaning. A dream of falling may signify the ego losing control. A dream of a dark forest may reflect the entrance into shadow work. A recurring dream figure could represent a disowned part of your psyche. These symbols are not random, they are mirrors. Jung encouraged individuals to record their dreams, reflect on them, and sit with them without rushing to interpret them in a purely intellectual way. Instead of asking, what does this mean? The better question is, what does this evoke in me? Dreams bypass your filters and present you with a truth you may be unwilling or unable to see in waking life. Similarly, instincts are expressions of unconscious intelligence. Before we rationalize, before we calculate, we feel a tightening in the chest, a sudden sense of danger, a pull toward a person or a place. These are not random sensations. They are signals. The body is often wiser than the mind, and instincts are the body's way of participating in the psyche's conversation. When you feel an unexplainable resistance to something, it may not be fear, it may be your deeper self recognizing misalignment. When you feel irrational joy in someone's presence, it might be the soul recognizing familiarity, resonance, or truth. These instincts arise before thought. They are primal, sacred, and often drowned out by social conditioning or fear of judgment. Yet, when you learn to listen to them, they guide you with an accuracy that the rational mind often cannot match. To access the unconscious, you must also cultivate a different kind of awareness. Not the awareness that tries to control or predict, but the awareness that witnesses. This requires slowing down. The unconscious does not shout, it whispers. It reveals itself through synchronicities, strange patterns that seem too meaningful to be coincidence. It nudges you through forgotten memories that suddenly resurface, or symbols that repeat across unrelated experiences. When you begin to notice these patterns, you realize that the unconscious is always communicating. The question is, are you Paying attention, the process of listening to your unconscious, also involves confronting what Jung called the shadow. Much of what lives in the unconscious are parts of ourselves we have rejected: our grief, our desire, our power, our weakness. But alongside the shadow also lives the gold, the hidden potential, the creative genius, the sacred calling. Jung believed that the gold is in the shadow, meaning that what we are most afraid to face often holds the treasure we most long to find. By bringing these elements into conscious awareness, we integrate them, and in doing so, become more whole. Authenticity cannot be constructed. It must be uncovered. It is not about adopting new habits or reshaping your image. It is about listening deeply to what is already within you. The unconscious knows who you are because it has never forgotten. It is not limited by cultural narratives or personal insecurities. It holds the archetypal memory of your soul's truth, and it reveals this truth piece by piece, moment by moment, through inner nudges, emotional shifts, and symbolic dreams. Each message from the unconscious is a breadcrumb on the path home. Engaging with your unconscious is not a one-time event, but a lifelong relationship. It requires trust. You must be willing to sit in mystery, to accept that not everything will make sense right away, and to honor feelings that arise without needing to justify them. Journaling your dreams, meditating on recurring symbols, engaging in creative expression, these are practices that open a channel between the conscious and the unconscious. Through this channel, energy begins to flow. Insights emerge. Fears soften, longings clarify, and slowly you begin to feel less fragmented and more aligned. Jung described this process as a dialogue between the ego and the self. The ego is who you think you are. The self is who you actually are: vast, mysterious, eternal. The unconscious is the bridge. Every dream, every instinct, every emotion that feels too big to understand is an invitation from the self to the ego. An invitation to listen, to respond, to integrate. This integration is not about becoming a new person. It is about becoming who you have always been, minus the fear, minus the mask, minus the lies you've been told about your worth. The world will often distract you from this inner dialogue. There are countless voices telling you what to do, who to be, how to succeed. But if you do not pause to listen within, you will live someone else's life. You will build a tower of accomplishments on a foundation that is not your own, and eventually, it will crumble not because you failed, but because it was never truly yours. Listening to your unconscious helps you avoid this fate. It roots your choices in something deeper than ambition. It aligns your actions with your soul's integrity. This process also allows for healing. Many of our deepest wounds are unconscious. They live not in our conscious memory, but in our nervous system, our emotions, and our dreams. When we listen to these hidden places, we begin to unravel the pain we have carried unknowingly for years. The body releases, the mind opens, the heart begins to trust. And in this unfolding, we come closer to our true essence, not because we forced it, but because we allowed it. The unconscious does not care about appearances. It does not follow trends. It does not care about likes, followers, or accolades. It cares about truth. It cares about wholeness. And it is always working to lead you back to yourself. When you listen to it, you begin to make choices that align with your inner compass. You say no when your body tightens. You say yes when your spirit leaps. You begin to live from the inside out rather than the outside in. This is not easy, but it is liberating. You will lose things along the way: illusions, relationships, identities that no longer fit, but you will find something far more valuable: your center. That place within you that is unshakable, even when life is uncertain. That place that knows, even when you're afraid. That place that calls you, again and again, through symbols, through dreams, through quiet knowing. And the more you answer that call, the more fully you step into who you are meant to be. Not because someone told you, but because your soul remembered, and your unconscious revealed the way. The persona is a mask. True freedom comes when you no longer need to wear it. Carl Jung coined the term persona to describe the social face we wear, the role we play to function within society. It is not inherently bad or deceitful. In fact, it serves a necessary function. We all wear a persona to some extent, whether we are a teacher in front of students, a parent around children, or a leader among followers. The persona is the part of us that knows how to adapt, how to behave, how to be accepted within the collective. But the danger arises when we forget that it is only a mask, and we begin to believe it is who we are. In that forgetting, we lose touch with the self, a deeper, eternal identity that exists beyond roles, achievements, or appearances. We become trapped within the image we have created and feel the pressure to maintain it at all costs. Even when it suffocates the soul, Freedom, in the Jungian sense, is not about doing whatever we want. It is about living in alignment with the truth of who we are. When we become overly identified with the persona, we sacrifice this truth. We start curating every interaction to match the identity we've adopted. We become more concerned with being liked than being real, more focused on looking strong than admitting vulnerability. This leads to inner fragmentation. The authentic self, which includes both light and shadow, is pushed into the unconscious while the socially approved version takes center stage. Over time, this disconnect breeds anxiety, depression, burnout, and a persistent sense of inauthenticity. We begin to feel like strangers in our own skin because the life we're living belongs to the mask, not the soul. Jung taught that the persona becomes a problem when it takes over the personality. This usually begins subtly. A child learns that expressing anger is punished, so they develop a persona of calmness. A teenager is praised for being successful, so they mold themselves into an achiever. An adult finds approval in being selfless, so they overextend themselves until they're depleted. These personas serve a survival function early on, but if not questioned, they calcify. We begin to live according to the expectations they were built on. We begin to fear the collapse of the mask because we've attached our worth to it. The idea of showing our true feelings, admitting we're lost, or stepping away from societal roles becomes terrifying. We think, if I stop being this, who will I be? But that fear is the very threshold of freedom. To move beyond the persona is to enter the realm of soul work. It is to recognize the mask, thank it for its service, and begin the slow, courageous process of peeling it away. This does not mean we abandon all structure or disregard social norms. Rather, it means we stop confusing the mask with the self. We become aware of when we are performing and when we are present. We begin to live from a deeper center, guided not by image but by integrity. This transition is often marked by a period of disorientation. When the mask begins to slip, we may feel vulnerable, exposed, and uncertain, but it is precisely in this liminal space that the true self begins to surface. The persona is designed to protect, but it also limits. It shields us from judgment, but it also keeps us from intimacy. It makes us palatable, but it also renders us invisible. Many people go through life succeeding in their persona and still feeling empty. They do all the right things, say all the right words, and yet, there's a quiet ache inside our longing to be known beyond the mask. This ache is not a flaw, it is the soul calling us home. It is the invitation to drop the performance and come into communion with the self, the part of us that is not dependent on roles, status, or validation. One of the first steps in this process is to examine the personas we've adopted. What image do we project in different settings? What do we hide to maintain that image? What emotions do we suppress because they don't fit the role? These questions are not asked to condemn the mask, but to understand its origin. Often our personas are built in response to pain. The persona of strength may come from a childhood where weakness was unsafe. The persona of perfection may arise from environments where love was conditional. When we trace the roots of our persona, we begin to understand its necessity, and from that understanding we gain the power to choose something different. It is also important to realize that the collapse of a persona can feel like a crisis. This often happens during major life transitions, divorce, illness, failure, aging, spiritual awakening. The mask we've worn no longer fits, but we haven't yet discovered what lies beneath. This can be terrifying, but it is also a sacred opportunity. Jung believed that these moments of breakdown were actually breakthroughs. They mark the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating all aspects of the self, not just the parts that are socially acceptable. Creativity can be a powerful ally in shedding the persona. Through art, music, writing, or movement, we access the unconscious and give voice to what has been silenced. The act of creating allows us to bypass the persona and express what is raw, real, and alive. These expressions are often messy, vulnerable, and imperfect, but they are honest. And in that honesty we reclaim parts of ourselves that have been long forgotten. We begin to see that we are not just the image we present, but something far richer and more complex. In relationships, moving beyond the persona creates space for deeper connection. When we show up without the need to impress, control, or hide, we invite others to do the same. This doesn't mean we expose everything to everyone. It means we bring more of our true self into the room. We speak from our heart rather than our script. We listen without pretense. We allow ourselves to be seen, not in our perfection, but in our humanity. And in doing so, we create the conditions for trust, intimacy, and mutual growth. The journey of shedding the persona also involves confronting the fear of rejection. The persona is often built to protect us from being unloved. So when we begin to let it go, old fears rise up. If I show them who I really am, will they still accept me? This question haunts many of us, often unconsciously. But the deeper question is, if I keep hiding who I am, can I ever feel truly loved? Because as long as we are loved for the mask, we will never feel loved for the self. True love, whether romantic, platonic, or divine, requires authenticity. It cannot reach us if we are not present. Letting go of the persona opens us to a love that is real, even if it is rare. The persona also affects our spiritual life. Many people wear a spiritual persona appearing kind, peaceful, or wise, while suppressing their doubts, struggles, and darker impulses. But the soul cannot be faked. Spiritual maturity is not about appearing holy, it is about becoming whole. This includes embracing our shadow, our confusion, our longing. The path to God, to Source, to the self, is not upward in image, but inward in truth. When we let go of the spiritual mask, we enter a more honest, raw relationship with the Divine One. That includes silence, questioning, and surrender. Eventually, the more we listen to the self behind the persona, the more energy we reclaim. Maintaining the mask is exhausting. It requires constant vigilance, performance, and suppression. But when we live from our true center, life begins to flow. We no longer live in reaction. We no longer need to calculate every move. We begin to trust ourselves. We begin to feel peace, not the shallow peace of looking composed, but the deep peace of being congruent. There is no greater freedom than to be yourself without apology, to speak from the soul without disguise, to live without the burden of pretending. This is the freedom that Jung pointed toward, the freedom of wholeness, the freedom of truth. Wholeness is not perfection, it is the union of opposites within the psyche. Carl Jung's view of psychological maturity was never about reaching an ideal state of flawless morality, unshakable positivity, or perfect behavior. Instead, he offered a more profound and more difficult vision. Becoming whole. Wholeness, in the Jungian sense, means holding all parts of ourselves, light and shadow, masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious in relationship. It is the ability to tolerate contradiction within the self, to embrace paradox without collapsing into confusion or shame. It is not the eradication of darkness, but the integration of it. It is not about purity, but about presence. To be whole is to be real, to be fluid, to be spacious enough to contain multitudes. In the modern world, people often confuse wholeness with perfection. We are taught from a young age that success means minimizing flaws, avoiding failure, and projecting an image of control. We strive to present only the best parts of ourselves and to hide anything that might appear weak, broken, or inappropriate. Social media amplifies this tendency, rewarding curated versions of life while punishing authenticity. But Jung warned that this pursuit of perfection leads not to healing but to neurosis. When we split the self into acceptable and unacceptable parts, we create internal conflict. The rejected parts don't disappear, they simply move into the unconscious, where they continue to affect us in hidden, often destructive ways. Wholeness begins when we turn toward these parts, not with judgment, but with curiosity and compassion. Every human being contains opposites. We are strong and fragile, loving and resentful, joyful and grieving. These polarities are not signs of brokenness, they are the very fabric of our humanity. Jung believed that psychological health is found not in choosing one side over the other, but in integrating both. The goal is not to become only light, but to become a vessel through which both light and dark can coexist consciously. This process, known as individuation, requires the ego to acknowledge that it is not the whole story. It must surrender its desire for control and certainty and open to the mystery of the self, which contains more than the ego can comprehend. One of the most powerful expressions of this inner union is the reconciliation of the conscious and unconscious mind. The conscious mind is what we are aware of, our thoughts, intentions, and self-image. The unconscious mind holds what we have forgotten, repressed, or never fully known. These two realms often exist in opposition, with the conscious mind striving for one thing while the unconscious pulls us in another direction. When we ignore the unconscious, we find ourselves repeating patterns, sabotaging our goals, or feeling inexplicably stuck. But when we begin to listen to the unconscious through dreams, symbols, body sensations, or unexpected emotions, we begin to understand what is really going on beneath the surface. This listening is the first step toward union. Another key polarity in the psyche is the tension between the masculine and feminine principles, which exist in all people regardless of gender. The masculine energy is directional, logical, active. The feminine energy is intuitive, receptive, and nurturing. In a culture that often overvalues the masculine, many people suppress their feminine side, leading to imbalance and disconnection. Jung emphasized the importance of integrating both principles so that we can act with clarity and feel with depth. Think with reason and listen with intuition. This inner marriage allows us to access a more complete range of human experience and to respond to life with more flexibility and grace. The integration of opposites also requires us to embrace our shadow, the parts of ourselves we have deemed unworthy or dangerous. The shadow is not evil. It is simply what we have not yet claimed. It includes qualities like anger, jealousy, arrogance, sensuality, ambition, and even brilliance. When these traits are repressed, they do not disappear, they leak out in unconscious behaviors, projections, and internal conflicts. But when we bring them into the light of awareness, we can begin to relate to them differently. We can see that our anger may contain important truths about our boundaries. Our jealousy may point to unlived desires. Our arrogance may be a defense against vulnerability. By integrating the shadow, we move toward wholeness, not because we eliminate darkness, but because we learn to hold it with consciousness. Wholeness also includes embracing our wounds. In the pursuit of perfection, people often see pain as a problem to be fixed or hidden, but Jung believed that our wounds are sacred. They are the places where the ego is cracked open and the self begins to emerge. He called this the wounded healer archetype, the idea that our suffering, when faced with courage, becomes the source of our compassion, insight, and transformation. Wholeness does not mean having no wounds. It means honoring them as part of our story, allowing them to shape us without defining us, and using them to connect more deeply with others. In practice, the path to wholeness requires a continual willingness to sit with discomfort. The ego prefers clarity, consistency, and control. Wholeness invites us into ambiguity, contradiction, and surrender. We must learn to live in the tension of opposites without rushing to resolve it. This tension is not a failure, it is the birthplace of new life. Jung called this the transcendent function, the psychological space where the conscious and unconscious meet and something greater emerges. It is in this space that transformation occurs, not by choosing sides, but by allowing both to exist and be held in a larger container of awareness. Wholeness also means reclaiming joy. Many spiritual and psychological paths focus so much on shadow work that they forget to celebrate the light, but Jung knew that the psyche longs not only for healing but for vitality. The integration of the self includes the capacity for laughter, play, beauty, and pleasure. These qualities are not indulgent, they are essential. They remind us that wholeness is not a burden, but a blessing. It is not about fixing what is broken, but about embracing what is alive. In relationships, the pursuit of wholeness changes everything, and we are no longer trying to appear perfect. We can show up as we are. We can acknowledge our flaws without shame and our gifts without false humility. We can hold space for others to do the same. This creates a deeper, more authentic connection, not based on image, but on presence. It allows love to become a mirror, revealing both our beauty and our wounds, and inviting us to grow through intimacy rather than performance. Wholeness also reshapes our understanding of success. Instead of measuring our worth by external achievements, we begin to value inner alignment. We recognize that the most meaningful life is not the one that looks best from the outside, but the one that feels most true on the inside. We no longer chase status, validation, or constant improvement. We seek depth, honesty, and coherence. We begin to trust the rhythms of our soul more than the expectations of the world. The journey toward wholeness is not a straight line. It is a spiral path, filled with cycles of descent and return, of forgetting and remembering. There will be times of confusion, resistance, and fear. But each time we choose to turn inward rather than escape, to integrate rather than split, we move closer to the center of who we are. This center is not perfect, but it is whole. It is the place within us that can hold all things: joy and sorrow, strength and softness, clarity and mystery. It is the place where our contradictions become our completeness. It is the place where we are finally, deeply, truly ourselves. True transformation occurs when you embrace the parts of yourself you were taught to suppress. Carl Jung believed that psychological growth and spiritual awakening are not about becoming someone entirely new, but rather about recovering the lost and denied fragments of your original wholeness. The journey is not one of addition, but of reunion. From a young age, we are conditioned by family, society, religion, and culture to present certain traits and to hide others. We are taught that some feelings are acceptable and others are shameful. We are encouraged to express certain identities and repress others. Over time, this conditioning leads to the splitting of the self. We keep the socially acceptable traits on the surface and push the others into the unconscious. These suppressed parts do not disappear, they wait. They wait in dreams, in symptoms, in projections, and in the quiet ache of disconnection from who we really are. Jung called these suppressed elements the shadow, not because they are evil, but because they exist in the dark, outside the light of awareness. The shadow contains everything you were taught to hide in order to be loved or safe. It could be your anger, your sensuality, your ambition, your sadness, your wildness, your vulnerability, or your creativity. Each of these parts carries energy, power, and truth. When they are disowned, they do not become harmless, they become distorted. They influence your behavior from beneath consciousness. They show up in addictions, projections, depression, rage, and cycles of sabotage. You cannot heal what you refuse to face. True transformation begins when you turn toward these exiled parts and say, I see you, you belong. This turning inward is not always pleasant. It requires a willingness to feel what you have avoided. It often brings up discomfort, shame, fear, and grief. But these feelings are not signs of failure, they are signs of opening. The parts of you that were silenced in childhood or exiled in adolescence are often deeply wounded. They don't just need to be analyzed. They need to be met with presence, curiosity, and compassion. Jung called this the process of integration, the act of bringing what is unconscious into consciousness and welcoming it into the whole. It is not about fixing the part. It is about relating to it differently. This is how transformation begins, not with control, but with contact. One of the most important tools in this process is self-inquiry. When you feel triggered, reactive, or emotionally overwhelmed, ask yourself, what part of me is trying to speak right now? What have I been told is not okay to feel? What am I protecting myself from experiencing? These questions help peel back the layers of the persona and allow you to connect with the shadow. Often what you find beneath anger is pain. Beneath arrogance is insecurity. Beneath avoidance is fear. Beneath control is grief. When you give yourself permission to feel these underlying truths, you begin to heal, not because the feeling disappears, but because it is no longer exiled. Transformation also occurs through the practice of radical self-acceptance. This is not the same as indulgence or stagnation. It is the foundation from which all true growth emerges. You cannot change something you hate while it is hidden. You can only transform what you first accept. Acceptance does not mean agreement, it means recognition. It means acknowledging what is present without judgment. From this place of honesty, change becomes possible. Jung understood that what we resist persists. The more you fight against a part of yourself, the more power it has over you. The moment you turn toward it, listen to it, and make space for it, that power begins to shift. Dreams are another portal to transformation. In the dream world, the unconscious reveals what the conscious mind is unwilling or unable to see. Shadow figures in dreams, monsters, strangers, wild animals often represent the parts of yourself that you've rejected. Jung taught that by engaging with these dream images symbolically, rather than literally, you open a conversation with your inner world. If a recurring dream features a chase, it may be the psyche's way of showing that you are running from yourself. If you are hiding in the dream, it may reflect the parts of you that have been forced into hiding. By keeping a dream journal and reflecting on these symbols, you begin to integrate the wisdom of your deeper mind. Creativity is another essential channel for embracing the suppressed self. The parts of you that were told to be quiet often find expression through art, music, dance, writing, and other nonverbal mediums. These activities bypass the analytical mind and allow the soul to speak in its native language. Jung himself practiced active imagination, a technique that involves entering into a dialogue with the figures or energies that arise within. Through drawing, painting, and writing, you begin to bring the inner world into form. These expressions are not just therapeutic, they are revelatory. They show you who you are beyond conditioning. Relationships also serve as mirrors for the shadow. The people who irritate or intimidate you often reflect qualities you've disowned. When you feel a strong emotional charge, positive or negative, it's a clue that projection is at work. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. This is not about blaming yourself for others' behavior. It's about asking what the interaction reveals about your inner world. Perhaps you're envious of someone's freedom because you've suppressed your own spontaneity. perhaps you're judgmental of someone's weakness because you haven't made peace with your own vulnerability. These insights, when explored with humility, can be profoundly transformative. As you reclaim these parts, something begins to shift inside. You feel more grounded, more whole, more congruent. You stop living in constant tension between the image you project and the truth you carry. You stop needing to prove or perform. You begin to trust your instincts, honor your boundaries, and follow your inner guidance. This is the emergence of the self, the deeper, wiser part of you that has always been present, waiting beneath the surface of personality. It is not shaped by fear or approval. It is rooted in truth. The transformation Jung described is not about becoming enlightened in a lofty or detached way. It is about becoming more human, more embodied, more integrated, more real. It is not a bypassing of the world's pain, but a deeper engagement with it. When you embrace your own shadow, you develop the capacity to hold space for others. You become less reactive and more compassionate. You see beyond appearances and into essence. This kind of transformation ripples outward. It heals not only the individual, but also the community. It creates a culture where people are allowed to be whole, not just idealized. The journey is ongoing. There will always be new layers to discover, new parts to meet, new wounds to tend. But over time, the relationship you have with yourself becomes richer, deeper, and more trusting. You begin to feel at home in your own being. The anxiety that came from hiding begins to dissolve. The emptiness that came from performing begins to fill. And what remains is not a perfected version of you, but an honest, alive, fully inhabited you. Jung's invitation was not to transcend your humanity, but to reclaim it. He understood that the soul does not thrive in perfection, it thrives in wholeness. And wholeness includes all of you, especially the parts that were once banished. To embrace what you were taught to suppress is to return to yourself. It is to remember what was forgotten. It is to find beauty where you once saw shame. It is to discover that within your deepest wound lies your greatest wisdom, and within your shadow waits your brightest light. The self is not something you created, it is something you uncover. At the center of Carl Jung's psychology is the idea that your truest identity, your deepest essence, already exists within you. It is not invented through effort, nor manufactured through willpower. It is revealed through inner work, through stripping away illusions, masks, fears, and inherited beliefs that do not belong to you. The self is the totality of the psyche, the unification of the conscious and unconscious, the harmonized integration of every part of you, light and shadow, masculine and feminine, instinct and spirit. It is not who you think you should be, it is who you truly are. Beneath the conditioning of culture, the expectations of others, and the ego's relentless striving. The ego, while necessary for navigating life, tends to identify with external roles, accomplishments, and personas. It clings to identities that were often formed in reaction to pain or to gain approval. These identities may bring temporary security, but they also limit you. You begin to confuse your job with your purpose, your personality with your soul, your social image with your essence. This confusion creates a deep sense of disconnection because even when life looks successful from the outside, something inside feels unfulfilled. That discontent is the voice of the self calling you inward. It is not asking you to become someone else, but to remember what you are. Uncovering the self begins with questioning everything that feels performative, hollow, or inherited. It begins with noticing where your energy goes into maintaining an image, pleasing others, suppressing emotions, or avoiding silence. These are signs that the ego is in charge and that the self has been exiled. But the self cannot be exiled forever. It speaks in dreams, in intuition, in the body's signals, in the quiet ache that something more is possible. When you start to listen to these subtle messages, you begin the process Jung called individuation, the unfolding of your authentic nature. Not an imitation of any ideal, but in harmony with your unique psychological truth. Individuation is not a linear journey. It is not about achieving a final state of enlightenment or moral superiority. It is a spiral path of descent and return, of discovering new parts of yourself, of integrating what has been lost or rejected. The self reveals itself in stages, as you gain the courage to meet your shadow, to reclaim your projections, and to confront the archetypes that live within your psyche. These encounters often feel mythic, because they are. The journey inward is the hero's journey, not through external conquests, but through inner confrontation. This confrontation includes everything you have been taught to disown: your anger, your longing, your sensitivity, your wildness, your fear. Each of these emotions, when faced consciously, becomes a portal to the self. The ego wants to deny or suppress them because they threaten its control. But the self includes all opposites. It is vast enough to hold contradiction. To uncover that self, you must learn to stay present with tension rather than resolving it prematurely. You must allow paradox rather than fleeing into rigid certainty. The self does not speak in absolutes. It speaks in symbols, dreams, synchronicities, and deep knowing that transcends logic. The process of uncovering the self also involves embracing the archetypal energies that live within you. These are not literal identities, but universal patterns of the human experience: the hero, the sage, the mother, the trickster, the child, the warrior, and many others. These archetypes are expressions of the self, and they become activated at different stages of life or in response to different challenges. When you recognize these energies within yourself, you stop living reactively and begin to live symbolically. You begin to understand your life as part of a larger pattern, a sacred narrative that is unfolding through you. One of the most powerful expressions of the self is the capacity for inner harmony. This does not mean the absence of conflict, but the presence of integration. It means you can recognize opposing impulses within yourself and give them space without letting one dominate or destroy the other. For example, you can be strong and tender, ambitious and humble, joyful and sorrowful all at once. The ego seeks simplicity. The self seeks wholeness. This wholeness is not found through control but through surrender, not to passivity, but to truth. It is the willingness to let go of who you thought you were so that who you truly are can emerge. The uncovering of the self also calls for solitude, not isolation, but sacred solitude, the kind that allows you to hear your own voice beneath the noise. In solitude, you meet parts of yourself that are often drowned out in the demands of daily life. You begin to distinguish between the voice of the ego and the voice of the soul. You begin to feel the rhythm of your own nature, your own pace, your own desires. This intimacy with yourself is the foundation of authentic living. When you are rooted in the self, you no longer need constant validation. You are no longer ruled by comparison or competition. You become centered, inwardly anchored, and free. This freedom does not mean detachment from others. In fact, when you live from the self, your relationships deepen. You are no longer relating from persona to persona, but from essence to essence. You can see others more clearly because you have begun to see yourself. You stop projecting your wounds onto them and start relating with presence and integrity. The self is not selfish, it is generous. It overflows, it listens, it responds rather than reacts. It creates connection that is real because it is rooted in truth. Uncovering the self also changes your relationship with time, purpose, and death. The ego fears time and clings to achievement to feel immortal, but the self exists beyond time. It knows that your life is not measured by what you do, but by how fully you are present. The self is not interested in goals as much as in alignment. It asks, are you living from the core of your being, rather than, are you meeting expectations? When this becomes your compass, everything changes. Work becomes a channel for meaning. Challenges become invitations to grow. Even suffering becomes sacred, because it breaks the ego open and lets the self shine through. The death of the ego is often painful. It may involve losing relationships, identities, or dreams that were never truly yours. But every ending clears space for a deeper beginning. The self cannot emerge in a cluttered psyche. It needs space, silence, and the willingness to not know. The ego wants clarity. The self lives in mystery. When you stop grasping for certainty and begin to trust the unfolding, you enter into a different kind of life, one that is not controlled, but guided, one that is not constructed, but revealed. In this state, you begin to experience synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that affirm your path. You begin to feel that life is speaking to you, not randomly, but intimately. You realize that the outer world reflects the inner world, and that your healing contributes to the healing of the collective. This is the work Jung saw as essential for the future of humanity, not just personal development, but psychological integration that awakens the soul. The self is not private, it connects you to the whole. As you uncover your own essence, you become more capable of seeing the sacredness in others, in nature, and in life itself. This uncovering is a return to what has always been true beneath the roles, beneath the striving, beneath the fear. The self does not need to be invented, it only needs to be remembered. And every step you take toward that remembering, every time you face your shadow, honor your feelings, tell the truth, choose integrity over image, you move closer to the source of your being. That source is not far away. It is within you, waiting patiently, gently, powerfully, to be known.